Princess Celestia, the Changeling Queen, by Vren55. Chapter 17. Night Talk and Fencing. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Martin Luther King Jr., A Testament of Hope, The Essential Writings, and Speeches. Chrysalis certainly didn't hate her sleeping accommodations. In fact, her bed was extraordinarily comfortable. The pillow gave just the right amount of support. The sheets had a luxurious texture, and the blanket was not too warm, but not too cold. But she certainly was suspicious of the alicorn sleeping in the bed to her right, back turned to her. Celestia had been silent, never intruding into Chrysalis's space. It was Chrysalis's only relief. But then, why did she have the feeling that Celestia was not giving her space to comfort her? Chrysalis's intuition was quite good. Alternia was terrified that her sister would come out and stab her in the back. It was all she could do to stay still in her bed and turn her back to her sister. Of course, she hadn't wanted to do that, but it was to turn her back to Chrysalis, or stare at her sister with wide eyes. At the same time, the changeling in disguise berated herself. She knew that her fear and even her anger was irrational. She knew that Chrysalis wouldn't be so stupid to attack her now, and after dinner. Alternia couldn't reasonably see her sister as the vengeful queen she had faced so long ago. In fact, Alternia's personal reflections were forcing her to remember that Chrysalis had never, at least not intentionally, meant to kill her mother. Grief and rage drove her sister, and admittedly herself, to throw themselves at each other with the intent to kill. It was a sobering thought that cleared Alternia's mind and thoughts of any anger she had long held against her older sibling. It was her fear that was another issue entirely. No matter how Alternia tried, she could not forget that her sister tried to kill her. "Still awake, Celestia?" quipped Chrysalis. "Yes, though I'm about to fall asleep." Or was. The princess's voice was neutral, but the changeling could hear the strain in it. Chrysalis chortled. "I don't think so. Are you scared, princess?" "I thought you could sense emotions, your highness. Why don't you answer that question for yourself?" said Alternia bluntly. Almost as soon as the words had left her mouth, the alicorn appeared to pulling up her blanket as if to shield herself. Her curiosity aroused, Chrysalis extended her senses to Celestia and chuckled. The princess, beneath her facade, was again engulfed with a melee of emotions, anger and fear being the foremost of them. The anger, though, had lessened greatly from when she had first talked with Celestia, but the fear remained. The changeling almost giggled quietly until she fell headfirst into the abyss. Confusion was followed by horror, and then uncontrollable hysteria as every one of Chrysalis's senses were silently, abruptly severed. For one horrifying moment, Chrysalis saw no light, heard no sound, breathed no more, felt nothing. She was dead. Gasping, Chrysalis withdrew. The changeling sprang up in her bed, backing away from the alicorn. There was fear. And there was Celestia's fear. In her long years as queen, Chrysalis had never felt anything like it. "What in the name of Tartarus's bowels was that?" stammered Chrysalis. The alicorn was silent, enigmatic as ever, but to the changeling's keen eyes, the tightly wound sheets and the depression in her pillow made Celestia look as if she was trying to burrow into her bed. In fact, Celestia looked vulnerable, something Chrysalis would not normally associate with the princess. "Answer me, Celestia! What could I have done to you to make you so afraid of me?" Alternia had no reply to the changeling's question. What could she say? How could she ever explain to her sister her fear of her? Could Alternia ever describe the fear that haunted her dreams for endless nights, or the terror that held her heart like a cold cradle of knives? "You've impersonated my niece and locked her in the caves to starve, and then did the exact same thing to my beloved protege. You've attacked my beloved ponies and the city they call home. You've played me like a fool and defeated me. What reason could I possibly have to not be afraid of you?" snorted Alternia in an attempt to deflect her sister's attention. "You're avoiding the question, Celestia. Answer it!" demanded the queen. Alternia groaned inwardly. There was just no dissuading her sister. Why did Chrysalis have to be so persistent at all times? The masked changeling had been backed into a corner, but she could hardly admit that Chrysalis had tried to kill her. Choosing her words carefully, Alternia slowly began. "I'm afraid you will stab me in the back and kill me as I sleep, because..." Alternia winced. "Because what?" asked Chrysalis, in a panicked, curious state. "Because my greatest fear is dying in my sleep," spat out Alternia. That night, 1,000 years ago, Alternia had almost slipped into darkness. It was true that the real Celestia had saved her life. For that brief moment, Alternia had been engulfed in total darkness. At the time, Alternia had simply accepted it. In the nights that followed, the changeling could not forget how completely helpless she had been in the face of death. In that void, there was no clever solution, no escape, no path, no light at the end of the tunnel, and remembering it terrified the changeling. "Oh, I'm sorry for prying," apologized Chrysalis awkwardly. Alternia said nothing. She was sure her sibling could practically see the waves of indignant anger and shame that flowed off her concealed carapace. So what her sister said next completely shocked Alternia. "You know, I'm afraid of dying as well," said the changeling queen. Chrysalis's reluctant admission yanked Alternia from focusing on her own embarrassment and caused the changeling to frown. This was new to Alternia. She had never knew her sister was afraid of death. She was always a warrior. "You know, a lot of ponies and changelings say they can see their loved ones as they pass on," said Chrysalis slowly. Alternia nodded, a guess on her lips, but unwilling to interrupt her sister. There was a pause as Chrysalis, before the queen, blurted out, "I'm afraid of seeing my mother." "Why?" asked Alternia abruptly, her ears straight as arrows, ready to catch her sister's answer. For a moment there was silence as Chrysalis hesitated yet again. When her sister continued, her voice was forlorn, swallowed by the chamber. I've made a lot of mistakes, Princess. Canterlot was one of them, but that wasn't my biggest one. I'm afraid of what my mother will say to me when I see her. Alternia frowned and extended her own changeling senses to her sister. And she began to feel the emotions her sister was giving off. She froze. What the changeling saw confirmed a sneaking suspicion that had been building in Alternia. But she was still unprepared for what she saw. Changeling in disguise expected sadness and guilt, but not to this extent. Chrysalis's emotions could only be described as an eternal rain of tears. The changeling's regret splashed against Alternia like a downpour of rain. Each drop, a sigh. Every sniffle, keen wails of anguish. And every sob, moments spent in silent, lonely sorrow. Alternia wasn't sure what exactly were Chrysalis's feelings to her own supposed death, but the events of the evening and her own sister's emotions washed that question away. The changeling could not help but sympathize with her sister's fear. Chrysalis loved their mother dearly, but in a twisted manner, the coup had been Chrysalis's way of proving her love to Camellia. Despite the anger that nagged at her, Alternia turned over to face her sister, an understanding yet melancholic smile on her features. Chrysalis, I think your mother would be proud that you care so much for your daughter and your hive, spoke Alternia sincerely, though she had to suppress the urge to smirk as she took in Chrysalis's wide-eyed stare. You really think so? Asked Chrysalis. Alternia was slightly taken aback by the question and closed her eyes to buy some more time. It was a question she hadn't truly covered in a while. She had been so afraid of Chrysalis, so certain that she would have to fight her sister and that she needed to avenge her mother. But had the changeling really asked if her mother would have wanted vengeance? Quietly, Alternia recalled her mother's love for her and her sisters, especially for Chrysalis. After all that Chrysalis did, after she had killed her, would Camellia be angry at her eldest child or not? Would Camellia in any circumstance forgive Chrysalis? An answer lay clear in Alternia's mind. An answer she found difficult to accept, but one that resonated with her and built upon everything she had learned about her sister this evening. The changeling opened her eyes. I'm quite sure she would, said Alternia. For she knew that Camellia loved all of her daughters. She knew that Camellia would be proud of Chrysalis for her loyalty to her hive and for her care for Lamia. Moreover, Alternia remembered her mother's dying moments all too well. Camellia did not curse at Chrysalis, neither did she order Alternia to avenge her. All she did was smile at both of them. Now, seeing Chrysalis as truly sorry for having killed Camellia, Alternia's hate and anger was not gone, but some of it was released. For above all else, Alternia loved her mother and wanted to respect her mother's will. Chrysalis regarded the alicorn for a moment. The words that Celestia had spoken were strong with conviction and comforted the changeling. The changeling's guilt for the first time in forever was slightly assuaged. To make the alicorn's answer even more sincere was the fact that Celestia's anger had also inexplicably diminished. Not gone, but it had been released, and sympathy had replaced it. "Thank you, Princess Celestia," said Chrysalis. "Don't mention it. Now I believe we should get some sleep," said Alternia, smiling. Chrysalis chuckled. "As long as you don't snore." Celestia giggled, and in that room, for one very moment, the changeling in disguise and her sister were thankful for each other's company, which was promptly shattered when the shards of an ear-piercing scream tore through the night. "Lamia!" shrieked Chrysalis. Red lights soared toward her. They were beautiful, like great flying torches that lit up the evening sky. But Lamia screamed. The lights were getting closer. Too close. She knew that their beauty was but merely a sham, a curse. But she couldn't move. Her wings had frozen. She tried to shut her eyes, but couldn't, as the red light exploded in front of her. Unbearable heat tore at her face, ripping her apart. She could feel every searing whip of flame that roasted her carapace. She could hear her eye popping like a squashed bug. Her left leg was a torrent of agony. Bitter bile and vomit choked her throat and burned her tongue. The pain had consumed every fiber of her body, every sense that she had. A soft lullaby. Its words unrecognizable, but suddenly cut through her nightmare. The words were unrecognizable and the melody alien, but the music soothed Lamia's heart. The pain crushing her body faded away, replaced by the soft, silky texture of blankets. The changeling sighed. "Get your hooves off my daughter!" Lamia's eyes snapped open quickly enough to see her mother charge at Princess Luna, who was standing at her bedside. Lamia could barely get a word out before the alicorn twisted to meet her mother's charge with her own horn. Even so, Princess Luna was forced several paces back by the enraged Chrysalis. "Chrysalis, please calm thyself. We did not do anything to thy daughter, but banish her nightmares from her sleep," said Luna, sweat pouring down from her brow. "You're lying, Nightmare Moon!" roared Chrysalis. The regret that twisted Luna's features made Lamia's heart skip a beat. At the same time, the young changeling recalled the strange voice in her dream. Princess Luna's voice matched that exactly. "Mother, stop! She's telling the truth. She sang something in my dream that made my nightmare go away," said Lamia. Chrysalis stopped, stepped back from Luna, and glanced at her daughter. But that's impossible. You've never had nightmares before. Lamia swallowed, her nerves getting the better of her. There is a first time for everything. But this is not the first time, is it? Asked Luna calmly. The silence settled through the room. No pony noticed Princess Celestia arrived at the doorway, accompanied by several guards ponies, all heavily armed and bearing weapons. Seeing that the situation was diffused, Celestia dismissed the ponies with a nod before trotting into the chamber and closing the double doors. Lamia tried not to avert her gaze from the gaze of her elders, but she couldn't help herself. Lady Lamia, for how long have you been dreaming of that day you were crippled? Asked Luna. The Alicorn of the Night's eyes were kind, sympathetic, and she wore a sad yet understanding smile. Lamia was struck by how dissimilar the pony was to Nightmare Moon of Legend, despite the two being one and the same. In the month it was after every week. Then, after that, once a week. Now they occur every month or so? Whispered Lamia. There was a gasp. Lamia turned to glance at Celestia, but the Alicorn's face was neutral. Still, the Changeling could feel Celestia's pity. Likewise, his emotions were of similar nature, but hers were more sympathetic than pitying. As for her mother, Lamia saw that chrysalis was frozen in horror, her jaw working up and down, but only feeble croaks coming from her mouth. Unable to say anything, the Changeling sprang forward and embraced Lamia desperately. But why? I placed a silencing spell every night. I didn't want to worry you, said Lamia quietly. Chrysalis groaned despairingly, muttering something about her brave, foolish daughter. When she loosened her hug, she had a fierce gleam in her eyes. I am staying with you tonight, said Chrysalis. Lamia nodded fervently into her mother's shoulder. Chrysalis returned with a slight smile, but her eyes shot a dagger-like glare at Luna, who nodded quickly. The two Alicorns hastily retreated, leaving mother and daughter alone. What in our mother's name were we thinking? We should have never forced them to sleep separately, groaned Luna, her hoof tapping against her forehead repeatedly. The Princess of the Night had anticipated that some difficulties would be apparent in the change in sleeping arrangements. However, she had never realized that Lamia was still suffering from nightmares due to the incident. If she had known, she would have never separated Lamia from her mother. I thought it was a good idea, sister, said Alternia honestly, in an attempt to console the Alicorn. Luna immediately straightened and stared at Alternia. Really? Did something happen between you and thy sister? Whispered the Alicorn urgently. It's your Luna. And the answer to the question is yes. Chrysalis and I did come to an understanding, said Alternia. And? The alicorn eagerly examined the changeling in disguise's features. Alturnia gestured to her chambers, and the pair quickly entered it and closed the door behind them. As soon as they did so, the changeling let out a long sigh. I don't know, Luna. I don't think that my mother would have wanted me to kill my sister to avenge her. Or at least I'm not sure anymore. But I'm still mad at Chrysalis. And I'm still scared of her, admitted Alternia. For good reason. She did nearly kill thee, pointed out Luna. Precisely, but as you've told me, I need to learn to trust her if Equestria is ever going to have peace. And it's been 1,000 years. Am I a horrible pony for having held such a long grudge? Do I have any reason to hold my sister's crimes against her when they were committed such a long time ago? Especially since my sister certainly feels some degree of guilt, at least for my mother's death, if not my own, asked Alternia. Luna contemplated this question thoughtfully and looked Alternia in the eye. I cannot answer for you, Alternia, but I will counsel you to learn more about your sister. As she is now, try to understand what she did, why she did, without revealing your identity, of course. It'll always be wise to try to ascertain your sister's feelings to you before and after you died. I assure you that you will become less confused in this manner. Although, I cannot predict what decision you will reach, Luna answered, sadness clear on her face. Alternia quickly realized that Luna was remembering what she had done to Celestia. So the changeling stepped in and nuzzled the alicorn. Luna blushed but smiled all the same. Thank you, sister. Your advice was most helpful, said Alternia. It was a pleasure, sister, replied Luna, extending a wing over the changeling. Breakfast next morning was quiet, but a great improvement. Compared to last night's dinner, Chrysalis and Celestia were discussing regalia design. Luna was whispering Lamia some advice on how to get a good night's sleep. However, Shining Armor, Blue Blood, and Cadence were oddly absent. In fact, it was only after breakfast that the three showed up. Your Highnesses, today we shall continue with the discussions of laws pertaining to changelings in Equestria, but in the afternoon we have planned a series of activities that will hopefully allow us all to bond in a more informal setting, announced Blue Blood. To be precise, we have booked some of Equestria's best masseuses, said Cadence, miserably failing to suppress the eagerness in her voice. Those who would like to work out the stress of negotiations have free reign over Camp Draco's exercise facilities, including our dueling halls, said Shining Armor. Dueling halls? Exclaimed Chrysalis. She hadn't realized that Celestia and Luna would actually allow the changelings to use those rooms. Yes, the rules for any combat that takes place will be explained later. Also, Lady Lamia, I believe you've had some trouble getting around recently? Inquired Shining Armor politely. Lamia frowned slightly, as a demure gray Pegasus in a maze outfit stepped from behind Shining Armor and curtsied politely. This is Cinderhoofs. She's been assigned to help you around the camp and assist you as you see fit, said Shining Armor with a smile. Lamia nodded and smiled gratefully at the unicorn captain. Her mother had a wary look, but didn't say anything.
Thank you, Captain Armor. You may rise, Cinderhoofs, said Lamia.
The Pegasus rose quickly, obviously nervous, which was not surprising. She was a changeling after all. However, she hadn't expected Cinder to be smiling as she did so. If anything, Lamia was expecting the Pegasus to be horrified or scared of her scarred appearance.
Is there anything you would like me to help you with right now, Lady Lamia?
Asked Cinderhoofs quietly.
Just follow me for now,
said Lamia. Cinderhoofs, also known as Cindra, trotted behind her elder sister, wondering how she had managed to keep her emotional turmoil under check. When Celestia had recommended her to Shining Armor, Cindra had felt equally joyful and terrified. It had been so long since she had seen her elder sister, whom she loved so dearly. Cindra had been Lamia's playmate, advisor, and confidant. In fact, Cindra would have decided to join Lamia when the time came for her older sister to start a new hive. Of course, that never happened. She had been exiled. But only because Lamia had pleaded chrysalis to spare her. Cindra owed her life to her sister and was determined to aid Lamia in her time of need. However, it was this past relationship with her sister that worried Cindra. Given how close they had been, Lamia could just as easily become suspicious of her. However, most of all, Cindra was terrified of the mother that had exiled her. The desire to run away screaming would not go away from Cindra's mind. Every time chrysalis ever so glanced at her, Cindra shivered and averted her gaze. In the logical part of her head, Cindra knew her mother could not possibly know it was her, as she had personally severed Cindra's link to the hive. Still, it was unnerving for the young changeling to be working in such close proximity. Luckily, neither changeling queens had suspected a thing, largely because Cindra remained quiet, out of notice, but just within sight, a perfect servant. During the negotiations, Lamia had asked Cindra to fetch writing materials and drinks for her mother. The changeling hadn't been required to say anything substantial or interact with her family members. It was only after lunch, when Cindra rejoined the diplomats gathered in the dining hall, that things got interesting. Now, your highnesses, I don't know about you, but I would like to visit your masseuses, said Chrysalis eagerly. Luna nodded gracefully, although she seemed a bit haggard. The negotiations this time had been much more productive, and the rulers had managed to get past several important issues. These included monitoring changeling entry into Equestria, and outlining a program that would promote the participation of changelings in the fashion and modeling industries. Yet, the discussions had been very extensive.
Mother, you go on ahead. I want to check out the dueling halls and practice a bit. If Shining Armor is not available, Cinderhoofs can be my partner, as I've dueled most of you chevaliers already, and Cinder mentioned to me that she knows how to fence.
Cinder blushed, but inwardly she cursed. The last thing she wanted to do was duel her beloved sister with the skills she had learned from her own mother. But she had no choice. As her mother decided not to allow Lamia to duel,
Unfortunately, chrysalis appeared to be in a strangely good mood. All right, be careful though, warned chrysalis, as she walked after Celestia and Luna. Shining Armor turned to accompany Lamia. Before she could take a step, Cadence whispered into his ear. The stallion blushed and grinned widely before he shrugged to a giggling Lamia and followed his wife. Well, Cinderhooves, let's go! Camp Draco's dueling hall was a part of its sports complex, both for diplomats and off-duty soldiers. Off-white, high-ceilinged walls were adorned with equestrian flags, as well as those of several other countries. On the side of the tatami mats that formed the dueling area were low benches with sets of fencing armor, and stacked on top of them, separate racks held the rapiers. All blunt practice weapons with round metal balls wielded to the top. They were quite safe for challengers to use as long as they wore headgear. Under the watchful eye of her two accompanying chevaliers, Lamia quickly selected a rapier and twirled it with her telekinesis, while putting it on the mesh fencing helmet and cloth body armor. Cinderhooves wasn't far behind as she pulled on a thick hauberk and fitted her weapon over her right hoof. Don't go easy on me, said Lamia, and then raising her weapon to an on-guard position. Cinder cringed. She didn't want to hurt her sister, but she had been given an order. If her disguise was to hold up, she had to oblige her sister. So she put on her own headgear and pointed her weapon up in salute and fell into a guard position. Good stance, remarked Lamia. Cinderhoove's posture was slightly off, but the changeling suspected it was more due to the lack of practice than from inexperience. For all intents and purposes, the maid must have been trained quite well. Time to test that theory. The changeling queen lunged forward, surprisingly fast for missing a leg. At once, Cinderhooves slid back, her right hoof twisting her rapier so it parried the blow. Immediately, Lamia followed up her attack with a stab at the Pegasus's midsection. Long, unused reflexes made Syndra clumsily roll left and almost topple. But with the help of her wings, the changeling surged back onto her feet and managed to dodge her sister's follow-up cut. Charging forward, Syndra swung her rapier in a low cross slash, aiming at her sister's foreleg. Lamia hadn't expected that particular move coming and was caught off balance. She was forced to use her wings to lift her into the air to dodge the slash. The whistle of blade song alerted Lamia to her opponent's attack, which, to the queen's alarm, was aimed at her head. Somehow, by twisting her neck and putting all her weight on her back hooves, Lamia just managed to evade the wild swing. Seeing that the Pegasus was off balance, Lamia slapped her opponent's rapier wide away and slid her rapier into place beside the Pegasus's neck. Excellent work! Lamia jumped, tried to spin around to see the speaker, and promptly lost her balance. As the changeling cried out, though, she saw a golden aura envelop her body and then was set back on her hooves. Are you all right? Asked Alternia, examining her sister's eldest daughter up close. The young changeling queen nodded, a bemused expression on her face. Alternia wasn't surprised. She was just on her way to join Cadence at the massage parlor when she had heard the sound of blades meeting. Unable to resist her curiosity, she had silently watched Syndra and Lamia fence. In all honesty, Alternia was quite impressed by the skills of Chrysalis's daughters.
Despite her injured horn, Lamia's telekinetic use of her blade was very good. Her mobility, though, was severely limited, as was her balance. In contrast, Syndra had fast reflexes that were matched by her ability to respond to those reflexes. However, her skill with the blade left something to be desired. A cunning plan emerged in the disguised Changeling Queen's mind. And after a moment of hesitation, Alternia opened her mouth. "Lady Lamia, would you like to have a duel with me?" inquired Celestia, picking up one of the practice rapiers. Lamia gasped at Celestia, something that was reflected by the observing Changeling Chevaliers. "Yes, please," spoke the Changeling. Before she could regret it, Celestia smiled, slid on a protective vest and eye shield. Her horn was too long for the typical fencing masks, and stepped onto the fencing mat. Lamia checked the straps of her helmet before raising her own rapier. "I've always liked the rapier, although it's not an offensive weapon," said Celestia as she raised her weapon to salute Lamia. The Changeling Queen did likewise and let the rapier fall onto an on-guard position. "But the rapier is a weapon, therefore it should be offensive, right?" asked Lamia, swinging her weapon casually. In contrast, Celestia remained completely motionless, her body held in perfect posture. "Well, the rapier is a weapon, but you do not win fights with it offensively," said Alternia mischievously. Lamia and Syndra both frowned at the same time, and Alternia had a moment to reflect on the similarities between the sisters. "Really?" questioned Lamia. She stepped forward, closer to Celestia, her rapier outstretched. And then she hopped back. Again, she stepped forward and back, testing her opponent's range. Yet the alicorn didn't move. Syndra felt an uneasy feeling in her gut as Lamia prodded and poked Celestia's boundaries. There was something dangerous about that alicorn. Despite the fact that she hadn't even done anything, it was like the alicorn had suddenly become a tiger, ready to pounce. Her elder sister seemed to have felt the same thing as well, because the confident smile on Lamia's face had been replaced with a nervous grimace. Out of nowhere, Syndra felt the urge to flee from Celestia. As her sister took another step forward, Syndra screamed, "Lamia, wait!" Lamia's eyes widened as Celestia's rapier shot forward like a flash of lightning. To her alarm, the queen realized she couldn't step back, as she just shifted her weight onto her forward hoof. In the nick of time, Lamia raised her rapier to parry the lunge, but that was only the first of Celestia's attacks. Alternia used her superior magic control and balance to launch a continuous series of strikes at Lamia's legs, forcing the Changeling Queen to move, which is not easy when you only have 3 legs. Trotting forward, perfectly balanced on her hooves, the disguised Changeling Queen pressed onward, not giving Lamia a chance to stop. Yet, although Lamia was constantly retreating and looked as if she was going to stumble at any moment, she maintained her balance. "You have excellent defensive skills as well as eye coordination. Keep it up," said Alternia, as her rapier blurred in a rapid figure-8 maneuver. Lamia couldn't reply. All her concentration was focused on placing her hooves correctly, a task becoming increasingly difficult as Celestia sped up her attacks.
Parry low, parry high. That's a feint. Place your hooves, shift your weight, riposte, thought Lamia as she backed away hastily. Sweat had quickly formed on her brow, and the queen almost slipped, but sheer determination allowed herself to maintain her balance. Oddly enough, while the princess's flurry of stabs came at an ever-increasing rate, Lamia found herself being able to adjust to the attacks. The Changeling Queen sidestepped another lunge and finally managed to launch her first counter-strike, but it was carefully deflected by a tap of Celestia's weapon. The Changeling Queen of the Skies allowed herself to smirk as her sister's daughter sprang back, disengaging from the fight, but almost toppling over in the process. Still, Alternia was impressed by her sister's daughter. Amy was nowhere near as good as some of the fencing masters that Alternia had fought. The younger queen was quickly learning to give ground and defend, despite her disability. All according to plan.
Princess Celestia, why aren't you going all out?
Panted Lamia. The Changeling Queen could not understand how she was surviving against an alicorn with more than 1,000 years of combat experience. For some reason, Celestia was holding back from her. To Lamia's aggravation, Celestia chuckled. A fencing duel is, in its most basic nature, a puzzle. Your opponent being the puzzle, and victory being the final result of solving that puzzle. So I am afraid I can't answer your question. It would deprive you of the fun. Lamia grimaced. Alright then, I guess I'll have to take drastic measures. Cinderhose, would you mind if you help me? You were assigned to obey my orders within reason, said Lamia sweetly. The Changeling wasn't sure if the Pegasus would actually fight her own ruler, but it was worth a try. Cinderhose was a good duelist, and right now the Changeling needed all the help she could get. Cinder jumped. She was not expecting this, and had to bite the back of her initial instinct to shout, "Yes, sister."
If that is alright with your highness,
asked Syndra, quite unable to hide the eagerness in her voice. Celestia nodded and Lamia blinked, surprised. But to Syndra's relief, she didn't seem to suspect anything odd. Strangely, though, the alicorn's smile only seemed to widen as Syndra fastened her fencing helmet and rapier.
Thank you, Cinder. Try to get an angle on her. I'll keep the pressure,
said Lamia, gratefully to have the Pegasus' help. She didn't know why Cinder was helping her, but she supposed the Pegasus was obeying orders. Lamia also guessed that Cinder was eager to have a chance to fight against Celestia.
I'm slightly wounded and my own personal maid would fight me,
said Alternia jokingly, sizing up her sister's 2 daughters. Admittedly, she was slightly apprehensive about fighting the pair, but Syndra had been a dear and far more likable than she'd anticipated. As for Lamia, Alternia admired the younger Changeling Queen's level-headed mind and her courage. Yes, she would not mind fencing with these 2 changelings.
It's an honor to duel you, your highness,
said Cinderhose, saluting. Lamia also saluted. Alternia followed suit. Before either Lamia or Cinder could make a move, Alternia charged forward. She wanted to see how her sister's daughters would counter this. Horn shimmering, Lamia met the alicorn's lunge with a rapid parry and quickly blocked Celestia's second strike to her chest. Out of the corner of her eye, Lamia grinned as she saw Cinderhose cut back and flank Alternia from the right.
a rapier scathing towards Celestia's neck. Syndra was thrusted, her hoof forward, sure of her strike, but to her surprise, Celestia's weapon was there to meet it in a clash of tempered steel. The alicorn counterattacked, stabbing at Syndra's weapon arm, but the changeling managed to parry it and return the favor. Rapiers dancing back and forth, the two continued to exchange parries and lunges. But Syndra was obviously losing. Celestia's rapier was like a conductor's baton, dictating the pace and tempo of the fight. Luckily, Syndra noticed her sister's lunge at Celestia, rapier held like a lance. The alicorn's response was surprising, her wings flapping almost like she was hovering, and her hoof tips just scathing the ground. Celestia danced around Lamia, attacking the Changeling Queen while using her as a shield. The movement was so rapid, so coordinated. Syndra suddenly found herself fighting thin air. The 2-on-1 duel rapidly descended into a contest of maneuver and encirclement. Alternia would press Lamia back with a flurry of rapid stabs and cuts. Syndra would attack the Changeling in disguise, which prompted Alternia to circle around Syndra and away from Lamia. When Lamia ran, and to relieve her partner, Celestia danced past Lamia and away from Syndra. The sight was not like two cats trying to catch a very elusive mouse. Suddenly, Celestia fluidly disengaged, batting Syndra's rapier wide. The changeling tried to recover her balance, but Celestia's massive wings flapped hard, throwing a gust of air that tossed Syndra into her sister. Lamia yelped as cinder hooves collided with her, and the two fell over. Head over heels, limbs all a tangle.
Sorry, my blade work is still a bit weak.
Groaned the maid ruefully, helping the changeling up.
It's alright. I wasn't mobile enough,
said Lamia. With a sigh, she pulled off her helmet. Ever since she had lost her leg, she couldn't really fight like she used to. She simply couldn't move as fast. In fact, it had been a miracle she had survived so long in a duel against Celestia without falling once. Lamia blinked and frowned and stared at Celestia questioningly. That didn't make sense. How could she not have fallen even once? After all, she still had trouble turning around on three hooves. As Lamia observed the alicorn, she noticed Celestia's smile was widening.
Wait, Princess, were you trying to teach us?
Gasped Lamia. Syndra's eyes widened at the same time as she realized what had happened. Alternia grinned, her eyes dancing with glee. 1,000 years ago, Alternia, she would have never even thought of approaching Chrysalis's daughter with civility. Yet she had taught her sister's daughter, despite that. She herself wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was in a strangely good mood after the move, successful negotiations, or maybe it was due to the sharing she had with her sister last night. Pity for Lamia's injuries and Syndra's helpless position could have been a factor as well. No matter what the original reason was, Alternia certainly wasn't regretting it, especially with the looks of astonishment and awe in the two changelings' eyes.
Yes, I was, Lamia. I forced you to move instinctively to help you practice your mobility. And you were putting too much thought into placing your hooves when your conscious mind still thought you had 4 left. Forcing you to forget everything but staying upright and away from my blade forced you to adapt. Alternia then turned to Syndra. For Cinderhoofs, my circling strategy allowed me opportunities to test your defense, while giving you opportunities to attack. That way, you would be able to practice your blade work in both areas. Syndra and Lamia regarded the alicorn for a long moment, aware they were staring, but unable to understand Celestia's actions. Lamia couldn't understand why Celestia would teach Chrysalis's daughter to fight. The princess's somewhat manipulative method was not unexpected to Lamia. Her mother had warned her that Celestia was a chess master, but the informative and friendly-mannered Celestia had conducted the impromptu lesson. It was a shock to Lamia. Her elder sister was confused. Syndra was boggled. Celestia had knowingly addressed her and her sister's weaknesses. Not only that, she had forced them to confront their weaknesses. And she had done so in the most fun and informative way possible. It had been a long time since Syndra was this tired. But at the same time, she felt ecstatic. And that she was able to help her sister, even though she was behind her disguise. Thank you, Princess Celestia, spoke Syndra and Lamia at the same time. The two stopped and glanced at each other, grinning sheepishly, much to Alternia's amusement. The changeling knew that someday Syndra would have to tell Lamia and Chrysalis. But for now, this moment, Alternia was glad to give the two sisters a chance to spend some time together. Okay, so chapter's over. I need to mention a couple things. Number one, no, I didn't do a chapter yesterday because I ran into personal problems. One of my pets got like super sick, and I was kind of trying to care for them the whole day. I also have a new job, so, trying to keep a schedule as well. I record these at like 2 a.m. I usually do it like 1 to 2 a.m. and go to bed right after, and I have them set to upload around noon. That being said, this is important because tomorrow there will not be a video. It is not because I'm not going to be working on the video, but because the next chapter is one of two chapters that is absurdly long. For comparison, this video was around 6,000 to 7,000. I believe it was like 6,400 words. Now, granted, the last chapter was over 7,000 words. I took this chapter a lot slower at a slower pace as well. So even though it was longer, it was actually less words than the last one. That being said, the 7,000 words and all these usually take about an hour to record. The next one is 11,000, and I'm not going to be able to do that in an hour. So this next one's going to be more like 2 videos in one. Considering the average of like 5,000 to 6,000 words, this next one's 11,000, which is almost double. It is one of 2 chapters in this series that are over 10,000. The other one will be chapter 25, which is over 13,000 words. So that one you can also expect to be a little bit slower. That being said, no video tomorrow. Well, this will be up. No video tomorrow, because the video tomorrow is also going to be fed into the video after, just due to the length. Anyways, this video is about an hour long, so I'm going to end it here. Thank you for staying so long if you've been watching through. This next chapter is going to be a very interesting one. So I will just leave it at that. Anyways, see you guys later.